Donald Trump surprised the world by recently announcing his intentions to terminate the Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Agreement with Russia. The treaty dates back to 1987, was signed by Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev. At the time, it was hailed as a watershed agreement between two nations at the center of the Cold War arms race. So why does the Trump administration want to abandon the treaty, and how will it affect relations between the United States and Russia? For this, we turn to Joel Rubin. He served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for Legislative Affairs in the Obama administration. He's president of the Washington Strategy Group. He joins us from Washington. Before we get to the question of the nuclear treaty, what's your reaction to these explosive devices going around?
Thanks, Larry, for asking about that. It's great to be with you. It is very troubling, and people in Washington are on edge as a result of this. The targets seem to be liberal Democratic icons, leaders, people who the president has identified as enemies of the people in some instances, and really has unsettled a lot of people here in Washington about really the real world impacts potentially of the political environment we're in.
How do these events play overseas?
Well, I think what it does is it just highlights for an international audience the kind of dynamics that we have right now in the United States. Our politics are too vicious in terms of the way people are talking about each other, talking about issues, and perhaps countries around the world aren't quite aware of how divisive it's become, but this may very well highlight that.
You've written that the Jamal Khashoggi tragedy provides a chance to reset Congress's foreign policy. How do you mean?
Thanks. I really do. The Jamal Khashoggi affair really has brought together a variety of threads about America's role in the Middle East and internationally. What are we trying to do, and who are we doing this with? And we essentially saw the Trump administration for a couple of weeks withhold judgment and, in fact, cover for Saudi Arabia, who ultimately took responsibility for his killing. And up until now, we've had a policy in the Middle East where we have tried to lead our policy rather than follow another country. And we've invested ourselves so much in Saudi Arabia in terms of policy, and they're taking us to a place where a lot of Americans, certainly in Congress, are not comfortable. And broadly speaking, the American people did not like the Trump administration's response to it. So we need to have a real reset about what our priorities are regarding Saudi Arabia and in the region.
Didn't Obama support Saudi a lot too?
He did. He absolutely did. And in fact, the roots of the support for American support for the Saudi bombing of Yemen, those roots were built in the Obama administration, and it's a reckoning of sorts for a lot of the policy leaders from both parties in terms of that war. But what's different in this case is that the Trump administration has really personalized its support for Saudi Arabia in engaging directly and in looking for Saudi support related to Iran, related to the Palestinian-Israeli peace process. And we don't quite know yet what the relations are between Jared Kushner and the Crown Prince behind the scenes. And so there's a lot of skepticism about the Trump administration's reaction to this killing and concerns that maybe the Trump administration wants to go soft on what should be a very clear place to go difficult and go hard.
What do you make about Trump trying to terminate that intermediate-range nuclear force treaty with Russia?
We are seeing the slow unraveling of the arms control infrastructure and global protocol that protect us from nuclear war.
But why?
We currently have well, first and foremost, Russia has been in violation of the INF Treaty, according to both the Obama administration and the Trump administration, for a number of years. But that doesn't mean that the treaty is not relevant anymore. This treaty, as you mentioned at the beginning, 3 decades old. It took away thousands of nuclear warheads from Europe. The Europeans support it. It creates guardrails and a mechanism for us in Russia. No treaties are perfect. Implementation always has problems. The danger is that when you throw away treaties, and John Bolton, the National Security Advisor, argued against this treaty for years, they have to be replaced with something. And so right now, we're on the verge of having literally just one treaty left with Russia, and that's the New START Treaty as in regards to nuclear weapons. And I think the president articulated a position that if we walk away, somehow Russia will come back and seek a better deal. And that was the argument he made about pulling out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal with Asia. And we walked away and they haven't come back and looked for us. So it's a very risky move.
What do you make of Trump proudly declaring himself a nationalist?
The word has a lot of connotation. I believe that Americans who understand the word nationalism know that that connotes military conflict, that nationalism amongst countries, particularly during World War II and prior to that, led countries to want to fight each other militarily, and we moved away from that. Multilateralism is part of that, but American patriotism, that's the real national ethos here in the United States. Being a patriot is something one can be proud of. Being a nationalist implies the United States really looks to conflict with other countries rather than cooperation.
There's also a racist aspect to it, do you think?
Well, certainly right now, there are a lot of concerns in the Democratic Party in particular about the language being used towards, for example, the caravan of migrants from Central America. I served in the Peace Corps in Central America, so I have an affinity for that part of the world, and it's a very humble part of the world. And the attacks against them, which are used in coded racial language, that is very troubling. And we're seeing now in Georgia, for example, in the election, that a predominant number of people kicked off the voter rolls are African American. In North Dakota, a number of Native Americans kicked off the voter rolls in very questionable maneuvers by Republican leaders in those states. So racial politics in America is coming to the fore right now as an electoral strategy, and it's really diminishing our public space.
Joel, as always, thank you so much for your intellect.
Thank you, Larry. My pleasure.